Welcome to Tales She Told Me, a podcast featuring ordinary women who have overcome and done extraordinary things. I'm your host, Farrah Haidar. Joining me today is Corrie LoGuidice. Corrie helps women and other underrepresented communities in the workforce to take extraordinary action, no matter their circumstances. As an inspirational keynote speaker, coach, and facilitator, Corrie has been featured in major media outlets such as TEDx, Girl Boss, Business Insider, Thrive Global, and The Mighty. A fourth-generation entrepreneur, Corrie spent over 15 years as SVP of her family's male-dominated regional distribution business, following a series of traumatic, pivotal life events over a span of 5 years, including miscarriage, abuse, divorce, and suicide loss. She made the decision to transform overwhelm into extraordinary action by stepping down from her role and taking risks to create her own inclusive opportunities. Now, through her keynotes, workshops, and coaching programs, she inspires individuals and organizations to become confidently vulnerable and utilize their experiences to take the action necessary to have a lasting impact as leaders. Corrie, her husband, their 4 children, and 2 cats live 45 minutes from Midtown Manhattan and 10 minutes from the beach on Long Island, New York. Corrie, thank you for being here today. So that was a very extensive bio, but one thing that kind of caught my attention is you mentioned that you are a 4th-generation entrepreneur. So obviously you were part of a big family business. So could you give us a little bit about your background and kind of where it led you to today?
Sure. I'm going to give you what I call the Reader's Digest version, so the shortest version possible. My professional background actually started with a really expensive piece of paper that said I could draw well. So I graduated with a fine art degree, which basically meant I graduated and got a job waiting tables because I couldn't get a job. And that really pissed my father off. At the time, he was the 3rd generation running my family's business. And he had said, you know what, why don't you come and, work for the family business for a bit? You could do graphic design, something within the creatives, realm, and see how you like it. At least then from there, you have a more 9 to 5 and you're not working, a restaurant job. So I said, okay, figured it was going to be short term. Blink my eyes. It's 15 years later. I'm actually running it as senior vice president. So never in a million years ever anticipated doing that as the majority of my career. But the truth was I was really well suited for it. So entrepreneurship does run in my family's blood. I picked up on, how to run a business very, very quickly and easily. And I really enjoyed what I did. So at one point I was overseeing sales, marketing, and operations. And my family's company was responsible for working with not only large Fortune 200 technology brands, but with small local, mom and pop retailers, on Main Street that sold those brands. So it was really the very best of both worlds that I got exposed to. And I really enjoyed the challenges. But the one thing that I noticed as, time went on was things didn't really feel as fulfilling as I thought it should. And that really didn't come to light until I experienced a series of events that happened over a span of 5 years, which started off with, me becoming very suddenly a single mother. I realized I was in an abusive relationship when my son was born. Um, had to take him with me to work one day, and decide not to go back, and showed up on my parents' doorstep with literally my baby, a suitcase, and no place to stay and no idea where to go. And making a commute back and forth every single day to where my family's business was, it was almost 2 hours where I had the ability to stay somewhere else while I tried to build my life up. So I was commuting over 20 hours a week while trying to, keep a roof over our heads, trying to rebuild our life. To say I was overwhelmed is an understatement.
Sure.
Right. And this is something that I think a lot of women still today, have to go through. I was seeing my son an hour every day, between, having a commute and the 40, 50 hours I was spending and, actually working. But with that said, I kind of kept moving forward with it because you really don't think you have much of a choice. Right. It's like, this is what everybody does. I'm just going to have to get in the car and waste another 20 hours driving each day. And what happened was I was successful on paper, and that I, was still making huge advances in my career for the company. I managed to save enough money to buy a brand new house in a phenomenal school district. My son was doing well. I even at one had found love again. I was dating, had recovered really well from, the trauma that I had just gone through. And my partner and I were in the process of talking about getting married. Our kids were best friends. We were going to be a blended family. And then I was the one to discover he took his life by suicide. Uh, so in having to start over again, the one thing I remember vividly from that day is, you know, it was 90 degrees out in New York. I'm from New York, so it's really, really humid. It was
Mhm.
middle of June, it's 90 degrees. I'm sweating and the tears are like melting with my sweat dripping down my
Yeah.
face. And I remember looking at the sun and thinking to myself, like, Corey, you and everything can be gone in an instant. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing with your life? Like, what you thought this morning was your life is obviously not your life right now. And one feeling I didn't expect to feel in that moment was a sense of kind of security, which was odd because I had already gone through starting from nothing
Mhm.
so soon before. So I was like, you know what? You've been through all that. You'll get through this and you'll get through it fine.
Yeah.
And through that process, that's when I discovered what I call the overwhelm culprits today, and it's something that I speak on and I coach on.
Mhm.
And it's a very simple, easy to follow process that helps you identify what within that moment is keeping you overwhelmed and what you need to do to move past it. And utilizing the process, I ended up, stepping down from my family's business because I really acknowledged the fact I was unfulfilled, started my own coaching and speaking business. And within a couple of weeks, I landed my first paying clients. Within a couple of months, I had over 40,000 followers online, multiple different press mentions. Within a year, I was a TEDx speaker. And then a couple of years later, during the pandemic, I went from being a single mom of one to a married mom of four in a year,
Oh,
where
wow.
I met a new partner and I'm now happily married and we have a new daughter and everything else. But none of that would have happened had I not continued taking action despite my circumstances. And that's why I'm so, so passionate about, helping other women and other people who should be in positions of leadership be able to do the same.
That theme of having that certainty, right? Like when the second terrible thing happened. And it's a theme that actually in this podcast comes up a lot. And it comes up with a lot of women who have experienced trauma and, have to rise up again. And then another thing happens and they rise up again. And the difference is you have experience, right? And this is something that I touch on upon, especially when I talk to mothers who are figuring out how to deal with their kids. And I always tell them, let them do hard things. They will rise, but B, you can't mantra yourself into, um, you're great, you're strong, you're wonderful, right? You can't, you can say that your brain is going to go, but how, show me the evidence, right?
Mhm,
Show me that. But when you've been through it, you're like, oh, I have evidence.
mhm.
And so we talk about that a lot. I'm so grateful that you kind of brought it up. Did you find any kind of purpose in your pain? Like, can you look back at a moment where you had like some real clarity about
Yes,
the way forward?
every step of the way. I could tell you every single traumatic thing that happened to me, my life was infinitely better after the event happened versus before. I just didn't have the perspective to see that while I was living in the scenario before the pivotal moment. So even using the example of, the partner that I lost,
Mhm.
right? My husband and I talk about this often, where he'll ask me, like, hey, if he lived, do you think that you guys would still be together? And the truth was, I really don't think that I would
Mhm.
because that partner, as well as my abusive partner, which they are two separate entities, by the way, I just want to make that
Mhm.
clear.
Yeah.
Um, but the both of them shared issues with addiction, which manifested differently for each of them. So, with that said, had I not gone through the experience with the partner that I lost to suicide, he helped me in so many ways in terms of breaking down the walls I built up around myself to protect myself from people that were from my abusive partner. But at the same time, I still never felt that full security with him because I always felt like the other shoe was going to drop, that it could turn into a scenario like I experienced before, in
Yeah.
terms of the addictions. But with that said, we still would have been best friends. But I would not be the person I am today, which is ultimately who my husband ended up falling in love with, had
Mhm.
I not experienced that loss.
Yeah.
No, it, like, literally would not have happened, and our daughter would not be here today.
I always want to ask people this. So I'd love if you could reflect on it a little bit. But I think women are often, when we're raised to follow a certain path, and we're the good girls, right? We do what we have to do when we have to do it, etc. And as is evidenced by what you did, which is you went into that family business, and then you're running it like 15 years later, right? Do the traumatic events kind of, I don't want to say provide an excuse, but maybe provide motivation to just say, like, at that point, it's like, it's okay to break the rules.
It's interesting. I think and I can only speak for myself, and I think this will resonate for a lot of other high performing women who are
Mhm.
similar to me, perfectionistic and stuff. No one ever knew that that's what was going on behind the scenes. So I was so motivated by, my professional success and how I delivered in that way that carried so much guilt and shame about what was going on behind the scenes that no one ever really knew until after, I popped out and everyone's like, well, how did you get through this and manage to do this? Like, how did you see all this success? And I'm like, well, truth was, it wasn't easy, and I
Mhm.
share after the fact, but I very rarely was sharing during it, which is one of the reasons too why I think it's so important that we're having conversations on shows like yours,
Yeah.
about all the difficult things that happen behind the scenes, because I think more women in particular will get support that will help them manage them quicker so that they could see that kind of professional success and still moving towards their goals that they might not otherwise instead just use them as an excuse.
So, here's my question to you, just a little bit more on the personal side. So, was the abuse before the birth of your son, and it was kinda like the birth of your son that just said that woke you up to it, or
That's
what?
exactly it. So it was happening all along. I was kind of completely blind to it.
Mhm.
And it was one specific morning where I noticed the potential for that to turn towards my son instead of me. That
Yeah.
woke me up, and I never went back.
Man, it's a definitely a tough situation. So
Mhm.
now you've, you know, left this regional distribution business. You started your own company. How did you make that choice on what to focus on? Like where to go from there? Because it's a big departure, right?
Huge departure. Um, Honestly, I am so, so grateful because while I was going through the period of unfulfillment
Hmm.
and everything, and this was while I was dating my partner that I lost to suicide, right? So it was
Hmm.
right in that like 6 months before that event happened. I put myself back in therapy to start working with the therapist that helped me with my divorce because I was like, something's off. I don't know what it is. I'm kind of in the dumps. I should be feeling great because I got this great relationship in the house and the white picket fence and all the stuff that I didn't have that I worked so hard to get. Like, why am I not happy? And she was the one that kind of helped me realize, hey, you're not being honest with yourself about how you feel in your career. And she was the one that encouraged me. Have you ever considered coaching?
Yeah.
And I thought she was crazy at first when she had said that. And
Yeah.
then reason why is not even 2 months before she had said it, I was watching a documentary on Netflix called I Am Not Your Guru by Tony Robbins.
Yes.
And
I'm
I was
familiar.
so transfixed. I had never heard of him before, but I was so transfixed by his ability to ask somebody questions and change their thinking and their life trajectory in a second.
Hmm.
Just that. And I thought to myself, wow, how incredible would that be to have as a career? But I can't do that because I'm meant to run my family's business. And I just, tabled it. So the fact that she brought it up to me, I was like, that's crazy. But like, why do you think I can do that? I didn't believe it, in myself. And she's like, well, based on everybody I've worked with, you have this uncanny ability to be able to push through challenges
Hmm.
regardless of your circumstances. And that's very much coaching, right? So therapy is the whole process of learning how you got to where you are today. Whereas coaching is how do you get to where you want to go, right? So
Hmm.
it's like the other half of that equation. So she's like, if you could figure out how to systematize exactly how it is that you do it, you can impact a lot of lives. And that to me seemed very appealing.
Hmm.
But at that time, I didn't believe I could do it. So when I lost my partner and I was like, you know what? Like, this career isn't working for me. I'm not going to see my son as much as I want to see if I don't change careers and this and that. What do I want to do? I figured it was now or never. So I did a lot of research. I did, signed up for courses. I looked into certifications to see what would be involved with being a coach.
Mhm.
And it was through that process that I realized everything that she could see in me, I had to be able to see it for myself. Because through my educational process, I was like, oh crap, I've been doing this for the last 15 years,
Yeah.
managing a huge, team of people. I've been coaching them all along. Like, yeah, I have the skills. I just had to be the one to believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I think most people don't realize, like, as you go up the ranks, whether you're your own business or even in corporate America, your job goes from being no like HR coaching to being probably, I would say 80% of your job once you're at a managerial level is just
Mm.
getting people to do what they need to do,
Right. Mhm.
right? So yeah, so I can definitely see that. But you also chose not only to coach business wise, but you chose to actually specifically focus on women and underrepresented communities. Is
Mhm.
there a story behind that? Is there a reason?
Sure, there is, and that's been kind of a series of micro pivots throughout the course of my business. I've been in business 5 years, at the time of this recording. But initially I started off that it was like open that I would help any kind of businesses.
Mhm.
And what really changed for me was during the pandemic, and I'm not sure during the pandemic, I literally had done my TEDx talk the week before the world shut down.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
literally, like I was on that stage, and then the next day, next week, everybody was in quarantine. So when it went live,
Mhm.
and granted, my TEDx talk is more on this topic of overwhelm, and
Yep.
taking action regardless of your circumstances and stuff like that. But I got a lot of requests and emails from people that through that pandemic, they were like, I want to do what you did. Like, how did you leave your family's business? How did you start a business? So it was there that I started working specifically with aspiring entrepreneurs
Mhm.
because they were the ones that really needed the help at that moment. That I was like, this is a way that I could really kind of, in a way, niche myself within a very large industry and provide a lot of value because I lived it. And it was through coaching those clients, and I've coached probably like 50 or 80 of them at this point, where I noticed that the majority of the people that were coming to me that needed this help, that was looking for that escape, were women just like me or other, underrepresented communities in
Yeah.
the workforce. They were, people of color, they were gay, they were, neurodiverse, all these different reasons that the cookie cutter, corporate American experience wasn't working for them, that they were looking to create something different for themselves to create inclusive opportunities for themselves. So that's how that pivot ended up happening.
So let's just say, like, inclusivity is like a top word right now. Even
Mhm.
I do voiceover work on the side. Even at this point, you won't even get an audition that says female or male voice. It's female sounding or male sounding
Mhm.
voice. So it's obviously taken a hold of corporate America. Do you think that we're progressing a little bit?
I think we're progressing, but I'm still not sure we're progressing fast enough, especially when it comes to leadership.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Why specifically leadership? Do you think that, maybe we're just giving, because I have my own thoughts on this, but I want to hear yours.
Sure, sure, sure. No, so for me, when it comes to leadership, and I'm going to speak specifically on the standpoint of women right
Mhm.
now and talking about post-pandemic world. So women post-pandemic are dealing with a whole host of challenges that hadn't been seen before the pandemic, which certain things are challenges that existed before, but they haven't really changed. Yeah, they're getting better, but they're still not where they need to be. So scenario right now is we still have the gender pay gap. Even though it's closing, it's still not enough that you have women at this point, as of 2023, are graduating college in numbers, that are breaking records.
Mhm.
Um, more women are graduating than men. So
Yep.
you have this huge qualified workforce going in.
Mhm.
But because women aren't getting paid as much as men, when we have families, and at this point, majority of US households are two income families because it's so difficult to afford everything. The women are the ones that are making the difficult decision to have to stay back because their paycheck isn't
Mhm.
worth as much as their husband's, even though they may be more qualified
Yep.
to be out there. So when it comes to making, structural changes within organizations, which I think is really what is necessary, that's what forced me out. I had tried, within my family's organization to get things, and this was again pre-pandemic. I had tried to get remote work, and mind you, we were actually selling the technology that Zoom was based
Built
on
on.
at that time before anybody knew what Zoom was. So I was like, can I work remote? Can I do a swing schedule? Can I, tried to come up with all these creative solutions, and I was always shut down because it's not what everybody else did. And as a leader, you needed to be in the office and you needed to show your face and do XYZ, which of course during the pandemic, everybody was able to prove you don't necessarily need.
Mhm.
But in order for people to be able to come into upper level leadership, you're going to have a certain number of women, again, I'm speaking for women specifically, that have caretaking roles, whether they're taking care of children or they're taking care of elderly parents at this point in time, that unless you address that, is going to keep them out of leadership. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, in order for them to get into leadership, they need to get into leadership to be able to make the changes for everybody else behind them.
Mhm.
So how exactly do you push through that? And it's my thought that there needs to be a certain subset of us that keep pushing no matter what,
Yeah.
and we do the difficult things just to kind of pave the way to make it easier for our daughters later on.
Yeah,
Right. And that's basically my mission and what I'm working towards.
yeah, it's funny because I've spoken about this on the podcast before, but I'll reiterate. I call it the paycheck discussion, right?
Mhm.
Which is you get to the point you get that first that first daycare bill and you go, "Wow." And then it becomes a matter of, well, the logical, and my advice to women is be illogical. We're so caught up in this logic thing. It's like be illogical. This is an investment in your career. And I
Mhm.
know that's privilege, by the way. Like for some people it's really just not feasible.
Right. Mhm.
But I always encourage women to try to strive and find a feasible solution, even if it means that they're paying a good chunk of their paycheck towards daycare. It's okay because the truth is, as you and I both know, 3-4 years in, they're out of daycare, right?
Right. Mhm.
And that expense goes away. So it's not a
Well,
forever, I think, you
there's
know.
there's a forever, and I could speak to it too because I've done both sides of this at this point. My son is now 8. I have a 2-year-old daughter. My son, I was never home with.
Mhm.
My son, I saw him like an hour in the night. The most I ever got to see him was through my home security camera systems while I watched him play with our au pair that I had
Yep.
to get live in childcare to accommodate that. And that tore me apart,
Sure.
not being able to be around for his day to day.
Sure.
Now, on the other side, I flipped complete 180 with my daughter that I've now built my entire business, that I'm entirely remote. I work from wherever I want. I created an environment where I was able to be her primary caregiver and be with her all day long. But at the same time, that has its own whole host of challenges,
Mhm.
in terms of childcare and being able to, do the work that you need to do with or
Yep.
without support.
Mhm.
So there's really no right or wrong answer. I think it really
Yeah.
comes down to women being able to identify like what is it that's important for you. So
Mhm.
for me, it's the time versus the lifestyle. Right.
Yeah.
So I would much rather live in a smaller house, have less expenses, and be able to have the time with my kids. Whereas for somebody else, it may be lifestyle. They want to give their kids
Sure.
a better lifestyle than they themselves had,
Mhm.
which they're willing to be able to sacrifice that time to be able to have more money to invest in that.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I think is BS that you even have to choose.
Yeah.
For it, I think women are kind of put in an impossible position that like it shouldn't be this way because if
Mhm.
you're a man, it's so sad. I was talking to this one woman. I'm running a research project right now with working moms, and she had recently had a baby. And she was telling me one of her biggest fears is that, she's going to get held back from different, opportunities for advancement.
Mhm.
Yet at the same time, she's holding a certain level of resentment because the second that their child arrived, her child's father's dad got a promotion. So
Of
that
course.
doesn't never happens for women,
Yeah.
right? And it's, no, you're not going to be able to do the work because you're gonna have to take care of the baby and this and that.
Mhm.
But the second somebody becomes a dad, they're like, yeah,
Let's pay him more.
let's bring up a level. Let's pay him more. Let's do this because he's
Yeah.
got a family to take care of now, right?
Mhm.
So it's stuff like that that needs to change from a like organizational and structure level.
Mhm.
But the way that you get there is by getting more representation into leadership, but that's not happening fast enough to help with the challenges that people are seeing in the workforce today.
And I will say, by the way, that at least during the time that I was coming up, it wasn't just men that were perpetuating that on women. It
Mhm.
was women
Yep.
perpetuating it on women.
Yep. Agreed.
Uh, yeah,
Well, and I
it
wonder
was.
too how much of that is because number one, they fought and they made sacrifices to get to there. So there's a certain expectation that everybody else make the same sacrifice, but it's not the same playing ground
Mhm.
now as it was before. I mean, right now we have a huge, childcare crisis
Yeah.
going on right now with childcare deserts and this and that. That wasn't apparent 10, 15 years ago when a lot
Yeah.
of women that are currently in leadership had to go through it.
Mhm.
So it's comparing apples to oranges. But I think also too, a lot of women have kicked and scratched their way to get to the top that they're afraid that if they don't toe the company line, that that's going to affect their security that they fought so hard to get.
Yeah.
So again, it's a losing proposition on either side.
Yeah, I remember, like, I was in a female-dominated marketing department, and it's a female-dominated thing until you get to the board of directors, like, right? Until you get to the C-level suite, and then there was, like, 1 woman. Employees, I would say 80% women,
Mhm.
but until you got to the C-suite, and often the from once you got in the C-suite and some of the senior management that were women, um, they would often say things like, "Oh, we can't do that because she's pregnant. We don't even know she's coming back." Like, they would say, like, "Don't give her that project."
Mhm.
Blah, 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 and it always surprised me, but I think it was really because they had to go into that room where they were the only woman and
Mhm.
justify why they gave
Yep.
this project to somebody. So, yeah, I agree with you, but I wanna go back to kind of, like, some of the clients that you've seen. I Are there common themes that come up with these women who are looking to make this change or looking to start their own business? Are there common themes that you see?
Yeah. So for sure, I mean, the number one theme that I see popping up is that thing of time. They understand
Mhm.
their time is valuable. They want to stop trading as much time for money. A lot of at least the women that I work with, they want the ability to share more life experience with their families and their kids, whether that be through travel or other ways that they're able to do it. They want more presence in their life. And I'm sure a lot of working women out there can relate to this because I remember it vividly, especially when my son was small. It's so difficult because you never feel like you're fully 100% with your family when you're with your family and you love them so
Yeah.
much and you want to be there because your brain is off thinking what you got to get done at work. But then when you're at work, you're never 100% there because you're thinking about what needs to get
Mm.
done at home.
Yep.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of a difficult challenge to have. So for a lot of the folks that I work with, especially when they're exploring entrepreneurship, their goal is to get to a point that because they're making all the decisions, that they can create their own boundaries, that they could create their own rules, they can create their own schedules to be able to create the existence that they, dream of one day having. And yes, certain remote work relationships will help with that. But I think one of the challenges that women are running into right now is they're starting to revoke a lot of that,
Yeah.
from post pandemic. So that security isn't quite there like it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, the pandemic really I still think we haven't really fully seen the full consequences of the pandemic yet.
Mm-mm.
It's funny, I was talking to someone yesterday and they were like, "How are things at business?" I own a bakery in addition to doing this podcast,
Mhm.
and we ship nationwide and all that. And I was just saying, actually, I found the post-pandemic years harder than the pandemic years.
Mhm.
Because there are certain parts of our lives that have come back full blown, and there are other parts that have not. And it's this
Mhm.
balance, but everyone's acting like the pandemic's over, which it is. I mean, technically, I don't know. Now it might be coming back. Anyways, we'll see what goes on.
Yeah.
Well, um, so first I wanted to thank you for this incredible discussion, but now I get to ask you the question that I asked everybody on this show, and I love to hear these answers. It is, what is a weird habit or ritual you have that makes your life more joyful?
So I would say mine, and it may not even be that weird, but it's definitely mine. So I'm happy to share it. Um, as a working mom, I find it near impossible, when the day starts, especially once the kids are up and my husband is up and everybody's day is going,
Mhm.
to be able to think clearly without having everybody else's, thoughts and this and needs and that in my head. So I try to wake up as early as I possibly can without, jeopardizing my sleep. So usually it's like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
And I use the first 2 hours of the day for me. So it's kind of like me time where I'll get my workout in at that time. I always meditate, I journal, I'll look through my finances. Kind of have a little money date with myself. I'll track my health and wellness, different goals that I'm working towards. So anything that I have that's important for me that I'm working on gets taken care of in those first 2 hours of the day. And I find when I miss it, that the rest of my day is chaos. It just, nothing happens. But it's also important too, because especially as an entrepreneur, if you are the visionary and needing to provide direction to what's going on in your company, if you don't have time to think and to reflect and just have that time to pause, it is going to be so much harder to make decisions that are clear and in alignment with what it is you really should actually be doing. So that 2 hours in the morning creates that space for me. And because I'm doing it first thing in the morning, it's guarded and nothing can pop up that is going to disrupt it.
You're going to laugh, but I actually have the same ritual. I get up, I exercise, I meditate, I journal, and then I look at my calendar and I'm like, okay. And then the best thing that I do, I think that really helps me be more effective in meetings is I look at the meetings and I go, what do I want out of that meeting?
Right.
And I prep
I love
for it. And
that.
I come and I bring everything. And it's like instead of an hour discussion where we're kind of meandering, it's a 20-minute discussion where we get something done. So I love that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Corrie, it was a pleasure having you. And if you're out there and like to hear more from Corrie, she's offering a free quiz on how to overcome overwhelm at corrielo.com/overwhelmculprit. All links always in the show notes below, as you guys know. And as always, I'd love to hear from you about this episode. What business would you like to start? Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Farrah Haidar. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll get notified when a next episode is available. Also, I'm giving away a PDF of some of the best quotes we've had on the show, beautifully designed to print and journal your thoughts. Email me at farrah@farrahhaidar.com and title it Quotes. Talk to you soon. Till then, chase your happy.